ready. Yeah, here they come. He's here. He's here. Let's go ahead and go. Give me an F. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul.
Good morning and welcome to the UU Church of Spokane. Thank you for being here now. We're glad to have you with us. UUCS is a welcoming congregation and we appreciate your unique background, beliefs, or lifestyle. If you're one of our longtime members or have been here a short time, or if you're joining us here today for the first time, we're delighted to have you. We also want to welcome those of you who are streaming our service through the internet. We welcome you as well. It is our mission to join together to create a nourishing liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in the wider world. Or in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. I am your lay leader, Lisa Conger, and with me this morning is our guest speaker, John Hancock, who wants to sit with the congregation. I will more formally introduce him before his sermon. Welcome to everyone. I'd like now to invite Catherine Alexander up here for a special announcement.
Well, it's great to see you all here. As you know, we went through an assessment period with the Healthy Congregations team, and they made a bunch of recommendations to us. And so in lieu of that, we have chartered Mary Lou and Rochelle to lead the implementation team. So Mary Lou is going to introduce what that looks like and talk to you about it.
So thank you very much. My name is Mary Lou Johnson. I'm one of the co-chairs of the implementation team.
And I'm Rochelle Strother. I'm also one of the co-chairs. So as Catherine has just said, we have been appointed by the board to serve as the co-chairs of this implementation team. And if you're wondering, well, what does that mean? What is the purpose of the team? It's really to help us become a healthier congregation. Wherever you think we might be in terms of our health, there's always room for improvement. And we're going to talk for just a couple minutes about how we could use your help in moving forward with this. There is more history about the implementation team's purpose and more information about the results or the report from the Healthy Congregations team in the focus, but let us know if you would like more information. We can provide that to you later.
So this congregation has done some really amazing things when we've worked together. We self-financed this building and built it. We helped pass marriage equality in the state of Washington. And not too long ago, we helped to pass a sick and safe leave for 40,000 low-paid workers in Spokane. When we've worked together, we've had some really terrific high points. We've also faced some challenges over the years, like we face right now, and we have moved through those together. And Rochelle and I both feel really positive about the challenges we face right now and think that we've really got this. So Rochelle's going to start talking about what we're going to be doing, and I'll be giving you a little bit more detail as well.
The first area of work that we see our team working on is reconciling and repairing relationships in the church. One of my colleagues at Gonzaga, where I work, said that organizations would be great if they didn't have people. And guess what? We're people. We are a church. And as it happens, we're imperfect. We step on toes, even in our best intent. And I think the work that goes forward from here today is for us to think about how might we rebuild those relationships that have been fractured because of our words, because of our actions, because of our misunderstandings. There's a lot of fear right now in our congregation, and what we've seen and heard is that that fear is coming from many different places. It's different types of fear, but it seems to be that we're rooted in it. And there's also competing values, and those values are creating tension and fissures in some ways. So we are excited about asking the question, how might we reconcile and repair relationships? And some of the ways that we're thinking about that are, first of all, through how our minister can rebuild relationships with people in the church, how we can do that between staff and board and lay people and other members, and also how we might learn and explore together ways to be more curious, ways to be able to communicate courageously. These are things that I struggle with, and I'm sure that many of you do as well. And so we can lean into that work together.
The other piece of that work is looking again at our covenant of good relations, which we haven't revisited for quite a while, and seeing how that can speak to all of us. The second area of work that we're going to be engaged in is looking at ourselves from sort of a policy and governance standpoint. Again, all organizations from time to time need to up their game, right? And this is a time when we want to look at our governance documents, make sure they're strong, make sure that they're consistent. We've got a small group of people who are forming, and we're interested in you, perhaps any of you who are interested in that, to look at those documents. We want to make sure that they are also supporting mutual accountability. We all are responsible for the achievement of our mission that we repeat every time. And so how do we do that accountably with each other? We want to make sure our communications are transparent so that we all are essentially sharing the same pieces of information. And upon that, then hoping that our trust becomes a very solid thing. The third area of work then, after we look at those documents and things, is based in our covenant that says that we promise to search for truth and understanding. So how might we gain truth and understanding about what the UUA has been doing in terms of its anti-racism and anti-oppression work? We've asked for a small research group to form to do some investigation and exploration of that question, and then report back to all of us so that we all can share perhaps some facts and then come to understandings for ourselves on that issue. So what we'd like to do is to ask all of you, Rochelle and I are going to be in the back under the sign implementation team. We have a list of this work and these questions of how can we do these things, these three things. And we'd like to ask you to come and talk to us and engage with us if you have interest in the work.
And I would just finally like to ask that keep in mind, we are human. We will undoubtedly step on toes. We will undoubtedly make mistakes along the way. And can we count on you as a congregation to come to us with questions and concerns in a spirit of curiosity? Can we ask that of all of you today? Thank you, and we will try to do the same with all of you. Thank you so much.
So now, please take a few minutes to greet one another and be sure to say hello to someone you have not met yet.
It's funny, when I left you this morning to go back home, I had an earlier service up here, and I opened it again. Oh, there it is. Thank you so much. I think I know the area of everything, but I always like to look at it.
We now turn from our warm and informal greeting of one another to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world, and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth is lost. Our opening words come from Ram Dass, the subject of our service this morning. They are from his book, The Only Dance There Is, and correspond with our mission. Create community. Live with the group. Take care of the gardens, the babies, and the goats. Cook the food, chop the wood, do yoga. Be in the community of others who are working on their own consciousness. Find meaning. The spiritual journey is cyclic. There are periods of going out and periods of going back in. Living in the marketplace forces things to the forefront, and sitting in a room on a mountain by myself forces other things to be confronted. Work for justice. Go into the city and pursue what the Buddha calls right livelihood, because after a certain point of working inside, you begin to feel the pull of service. It is a karmic predicament. You can only collect so much before you must hand it over and spread it out. Then you can go back inside. The whole process is one of building these different parts of ourselves. We rotate through the various scenes. The only thing you have to offer to another human being ever is your own state of being.
And next we go back in, and we will do that through some music. Many of you like this piece. It's out of the Turquoise Hymnal. It's number 1009 if you want to look in that book. It's called Meditation on Breathing, and the choir has sung this quite often. And I think it's a good rounding off about meditation. So I would invite you to come in where you feel comfortable. You may be comfortable doing the breathe in, breathe out on one tone, like we will start. Or you might want to come in with the altos if you have a lower voice. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. Or if you are a higher voice, you might want to come in with the sopranos. So let us start. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out.
Are there any children here that are your meeting or your age? Because if you would like to come on, you're welcome to. All right. So let me, since there's no little ones, I think I'm going to use the podium. So I'm going to tell you a story about a king and his friends. one friend in particular. And I get to say this, I get to tell the story because I am a princess. And I've been a princess for many, many lives. And I know that because I've seen myself in my past lives. So that's what makes me an authority on prince and princesses and kings and queens. So you can take it from me, okay? And I have many stories like this. So there was once a king in a land far, far away, and he had many, many people working for him. But there was one particular man that he loved, because this man was so full of positiveness. He just oozed good attitude. And the way he did this was no matter what happened, he would say, "It's all good." So it wouldn't matter what happened. Maybe he got a present and he would say, "Oh, it's all good." Or maybe he tripped and fell and he would say, "It's all good." And so the king liked that very much. And he liked the servant so much that they became best friends. And they would do everything together. And one day, they decided to go hunting. Now, it was the servant's job to prepare everything for the king. So they were out there and they were chatting along, having a great time, and the servant was stuffing gunpowder into the gun. And he wasn't really thinking about it. He was just enjoying himself. So he hands the gun to the king, and the king took a shot and blew off his thumb. And of course, it was very painful. And the servant said, "Oh, it's all good." Right. Well, the king didn't agree with that. He was quite angry. And he said, "It is not all good. Look what you did. And I'm really hurting." So they patched him up, and they took him back to the castle. And the king says, "Look, you can't be so distracted that you are blowing my thumb off, okay? So we're going to ask the judge to decide what to do with you." So they took him to court, and he was found to be guilty of being distracted. And he said, "Look, I hate to do this, but you need to learn that it's not all good. It's not okay to blow the king's thumb off. So we're going to sentence you to 5 years in jail." And the servant says, "It's all good." Very good. Oh my gosh, you're so trainable. So off he goes into jail. And the king was very sad because he doesn't have his best friend with him anymore. But life goes on. And he enjoys himself after a while, and he forgot. And a couple years go by. And he decides he's going to go on a road trip. He's going to go find out what the world is about. And he's going to go find his neighbors. And so off he goes with a whole entourage of people that takes care of him. And as he goes along, he meets these people. And they were so happy to meet him because they were carnivores. I mean, what do you call that? Cannibals. So these people were so happy to see them. And so they say, "Please come in, let's have fun, let's have a party." So they get everything all ready. And then pretty quickly they tied up all the king and his people. And as they got ready and everybody's dancing, well, not the king and his people, but the cannibals. So they were all dancing and having a great time, and they start to lower the king into the pot over the hot burning wood. And then the guy who was cooking, who was lowering it, he said, "Stop, everybody stop. There's something wrong." And they all said, "What? What happened? We were having such a good time." And the head cook guy said, "We only eat perfect food. This man is not perfect." So they took the king down and they told him to go away. "Because you're not perfect. You must leave." And they continued on with their party and ate everybody else. So he felt really bad. He lost all his servants. But he goes home and he says, oh, my favorite servant. I need to go talk to him. So he goes to jail. He says, I'm so sorry. You had to sit in this jail for 2 years, and I just feel so bad. I'm going to let you out. Because, I shouldn't have done that. Because, of this thumb, I got saved, right? The lack of thumb. And so the guy comes out and he goes, but it's okay. It's all good. And the king says, how can this be all good? You've been in jail for 2 years. And the servant says, well, had I not blown off your thumb, had I not been in jail, I would have been on that trip with you. So I'm at the end of my story, and I will let you decide what is all good, or maybe just a little good, or maybe not good at all.
We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world. Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our minds and hearts and who we want to wrap in our love and care. We kindle light this morning for them. Let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here in our hearts this morning. You are welcome to say their names aloud as you are willing. those named aloud and those remembered in the silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world this hour, we hold in our community of compassion. Our meditation this morning is by Ram Dass. Please find a receptive posture, close your eyes if you wish, and take a couple of deep breaths. Rather than words followed by silence, the words are the meditation. Be right here, aware of sitting here, aware of the self-definition that you're creating your own mind. Be aware of your ears listening. Be aware of me speaking. Aware of the feelings in your body. Aware of your mind grabbing at this and that. Just sit with me in awareness. There is nothing we have to do. Just come into this moment. Don't collect it. Don't judge it. Just bring in your awareness. Watch your mind. Listen to yourself. Let go of your expectations a little more. Expectations of where you're going, of where you've come from. Stay there, here in this moment. Be here now. Stay here now.
Normally this is the place where the choir sings for you. But today they're going to sing, and we'd like you to sing along too. We're going to sing John Lennon and Paul McCartney's Let It Be. You should have words on the screen up here to go along with, and give it your gusto. Okay.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And when the broken-hearted people living in the world agree, there will be an answer, let it be. For though they may be parted, there is still a chance that they will see. There will be an answer, is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me. Shine until tomorrow, let it be. I wake up to the sound of music. Mother Mary calls to me, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be. 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 There will be an answer. Let it be. 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 There will be an answer. Let it be.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. John Hancock has been a UUCS member for a year. He met us through Warriors Heart to Art, the Veterans Healing Art Project hosted here for several years. Dr. Hancock was a music professor at Murray State University and the University of Michigan. He earned music performance degrees from the University of Michigan and Boston University and received executive education at the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. After his professional career as an orchestra performer, he moved into management and arrived in Spokane in 1999 as executive director of the Spokane Symphony. The Fox Theater renovation grew from his vision and leadership. Then for 12 years, he provided consulting advice to 50 Spokane area nonprofit organizations. Now he's the executive director of Spokane Housing Ventures. He's teaching servant leadership as a government contractor in affordable housing, serving 2,500 people in 10 counties. A theme of his career has been helping people find self-expression and deeper meaning in their lives and activities through professional program creation, public advocacy, volunteerism, and fundraising. He is a very accomplished person. He and his wife Jane live in Deep Creek. Welcome now, John.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for the opportunity to come and tell some stories. The universe is a benevolent place, and it arcs towards growth, towards love, and towards inclusion. It moves towards love as we move towards love. That's the message of Ram Dass. And it's available to all of us because it is all of us. And on that progression towards love, we can either be keeping up, we can be lagging, or we can be on the fence. And that's the simple way of my understanding of what's called karma and what's known as reincarnation. My children seem different from each other. My brothers seem different from me. And the way I grew to understand that is we've all been someone else before. We're not starting from scratch in this life. We won't lose this life as we go to the next one. Ram Dass's career, over 70 years, was spent exploring himself, exploring the universe, and telling people about it. So what today is about is just some excerpts from that journey of Ram Dass that I think he has shared with us in such beautiful ways. Birthdays were never traumatic for me, says Ram Dass, largely because I tried to ignore them. They came and went. I aged and forgot and went along my merry way until I arrived at age 60. That year, for the first time, I began to take notice of how old I was. In India, where I've spent a great deal of time, entering one's seventh decade is a defining moment, the threshold to a stage of life when we're meant to turn away from worldly things and focus attention on God. This seemed like a momentous passage, and during that birthday week, I surrendered to 3 different parties in 3 different parts of the country, each celebrating my coming of age. For about 6 months, I tried being 60. Thinking of myself in that context, I wondered about how my life should change, who I should work towards becoming now that I was officially old. I thought about winding up my worldly affairs, and though most of my life had been devoted to spiritual matters, retreating even further from worldly temptations. But after a half a year, this notion seemed like a bogus mind trip. Nothing had changed inside me at all. I didn't feel like 60 or any age whatsoever, and as for giving up my outer activities, I was busier than ever. I decided to give up being an old man and return to the life I had before, forgetting that I was aging. Can we look at the first slide, please? 2 years later, at 62, I had another wake-up call. On a soft autumn evening in 1993, I was on a train between Connecticut and New York, admiring the brilliant New England foliage after a day spent hiking with a dear friend in the woodlands surrounding her home. I was deeply contented there on the coach, reflecting on the colors of the day, when a conductor came down the aisle collecting tickets. "I'll have to buy one from you," I said. "What kind will it be?" he asked. "Do I have a choice? Regular or senior?" Now, although I was bald, covered with age spots, and battling high blood pressure and gout, it had never occurred to me, not once, that I could be called a senior citizen. I said in a squeaky-sounding voice, "Senior." "That'll be $4.50, he said. "How much would the regular ticket be?" "7. Well, I was pleased with that, of course, but the satisfaction of saving the money quickly faded. What identity had I taken on with the discount of a senior citizen? As the coach rattled on, I felt troubled and anxious, weighed down by the baggage of my new label. 6 years later, after starting to write this book, it's called Still Here, a follow-up to Be Here Now, Still Here, he had a hard time finishing the book because he didn't know what was going to happen next. He had a stroke in 1997, shortly after going to the funeral of a man named Timothy Leary. And he spent 2 years near death, basically, paralyzed on his right side, lost his speech, and was surrounded by the sort of love and help that he had been delivering all of his life. And he lived until Christmas time, continuing to try to understand himself better, to explain himself better, and to hopefully offer some lessons for our own exploration. So his manner of self-discovery never stopped. He never got too old to try to understand himself better. Let me return to that book, Still Here. Along with the feeling of powerlessness that many people experience with age can come a loss of meaning. The belief that as the roles to which we've been accustomed, such as worker, parent, consumer, lover, as those roles change, we cease to matter as individuals. Such painful feelings of meaninglessness and the depression they often engender deprive us of joy and lead us to see ourselves as burdensome and obsolete. Instead of honor and care, many of our aging population experience boredom, despair, and emptiness with no outlet for our dissatisfaction. It is important that we not wait until we find ourselves at such an impasse before seeking an alternative to confronting our aging years. The sooner we begin cultivating a mind that can work with such heavy mental states as meaninglessness and depression, the better able we will be later on to escape them. Dependency is a big hurdle for most people, especially given the values of our society. Being dependent, needing help, makes us feel diminished because we value self-sufficiency and independence so highly. We value taking care of others, but shun the notion of being taken care of ourselves. I certainly have confronted this issue a great deal since my stroke and have learned firsthand how difficult the ego can make it for us. At first, it was hard for me. I had to confront those aspects that made me want to hold myself separate and not accept help. This willful, stubborn part of the ego develops in the period known as the terrible twos, when the child first refuses to be aided by its parents, and it persists without our knowing it as we age. If we've never developed a way of asking for help, this is going to be a very difficult hurdle. If needing someone else embarrasses us or gives rise to feelings of humiliation, we may well deny the need for help as long as we can. Rather than opening our hands to accept what others have to offer, many of us close down when we have to ask for something, making it hard to be grateful and creating a situation that's no fun for anybody. What I've found, in fact, is that when there is true surrender and service between people, the roles of helper and the helped, and the boundaries between those in power and those who are powerless begin to dissolve. And just one more. Time and change are interrelated. We measure time by what changes, and we measure change in increments of time. For many of us, apprehension over what the future may hold is synonymous with our fear of change. As egos, we resist letting go of the known. Change is almost always viewed as a threat, since the ego is only comfortable with what it can control. But this is where a conscious aging can help to relieve the anxiety we feel about change. Because the soul is not subject to change in the same way as the ego. It does not measure time in the same way. Soul time is measured in incarnations. Each incarnation is like an hour or even a minute for the soul. As the ego moves in terrestrial time, the soul exists in soul time. The soul thinks in terms of endless eons. By learning to remain in both time perspectives, we experience a stillness that enables us to accept the turbulence of change and also to catch our breath. I appreciate the efforts of Lisa and Deb and the choir in getting just the right music that ties these ideas together. They're not new in the world of Unitarianism at all. And throughout the gray hymnal, throughout the blue hymnal, there are songs and stories about the soul expressed in all different languages. That's one of the methods of this faith, is to bring to wisdom, not just of the ages, but of all the cultures around the world. And I think the point is to illustrate the commonality between all those ways of feeling soul, being soul, understanding the sages, understanding the wisdom in a cultural sense and in a current sense. But if we give up time as being the way we humans understand it, that's what I mean when I say the universe is moving towards oneness. Ram Dass went to the East to find a wisdom he failed to find in America. Let's go to the next slide, please. He found on a mountaintop in India his guru, who seemed like a magical being. Ram Dass' skepticism about religion began when he was a teenager. He was Jewish, lived in Boston. His father was a Ivy League spick and span lawyer, owner of a railroad, founder of Brandeis University, and on the board of his synagogue. And when Ram Dass found out that the next rabbi was being selected by the elders of the church, he thought, wait a minute, I thought God selects these guys. And if my dad's in charge of choosing the rabbi, then what's this relationship between the rabbi and the God and the dad? So he was not sure what the answer was, but it wasn't quite what he'd been raised to believe about God. And he found on the mountainside this this guru, which means teacher, sort of as an accent. He was on the trip around the world with a first-class ticket. He was traveling with a young man from Santa Monica with long hair and beads who had bought the fanciest Range Rover that he could find on the market in Tehran, and so they were just on the tour of India. And his friend knew his way around way better than he did. He knew some Sanskrit. He'd been there before. But Ram Dass was just sort of a high-class visitor along to see something interesting. So the very first meeting between Mahariji, that's the man in the background, and these two young Americans, his friend just fell to the ground outside the holy man in the temple and started touching his feet. And Ram Dass was kind of creeped out about that. So he just stood in the background with his hands in his pockets to see what was going to happen. And it was a trip that he'd never been on. This was very foreign to him. And so that night, under the stars, he had a vision of his mother, who had died just before he left of spleen cancer. And when he got his turn to approach the holy man, he said, "You were thinking about your mother last night. She died of big stomach." And he thought, wait a minute, I didn't know the CIA was following me. Where's the magic button that the guy pushes to get the message? And so in the time that he spent with him, it was a continual unfolding of that man's ability to see into this man, into his soul. And he couldn't explain it, but he had to believe it because it was such a great story, such an impact. And all day long, from all over the world, were pilgrims coming to see this man and simply be with him because he was love. Ram Dass was not his given name. It's kind of a funny name. Before he was Ram Dass, he was a Stanford PhD psychology professor, Freudian psychotherapist, charismatic college professor in his early 30s, deeply dissatisfied with all the theories he had been taught about who we are, what our consciousness is, what our ego is, what our id is. He learned the messages. He delivered excellent lectures. He won awards. He toured around. He did all the stuff that a free-swinging young American bachelor professor gets to do. He had sports cars. He had a fancy apartment in Cambridge, and he was living the high life. He had enough money from his father that there were no material struggles in his life. But he figured out it was all just a hustle. He himself had figured out nothing new to say. There was nothing original in Richard Alpert. Those of you who may remember an ABC TV series called Lost, there was a character called Richard Alpert who didn't age. So over several centuries of flashbacks in the show, here was Richard Alpert looking just the same. And there was the home office of the central mystery was called the Dharma Initiative. And of course, Dharma is a Buddhist term for being on the trip. And I tried to find some deeper meaning between the script of that show and Richard Alpert and the Dharma Initiative and Ram Dass. But I think the people who wrote the show just didn't bother to do the work to tie the whole story together. So the name is in common, but Ram Dass cared deeply about getting old, and Richard Alpert in the show never got old at all. So those two things don't go together very well. So Richard Alpert, big man at Harvard, along with Timothy Leary, who had an office in a closet just down the hall, and with a man named Andrew Weil, who you may know of, an author in health. He was an MD. They began in the early 60s a series of experiments in hallucinogenic drugs. LSD had been synthesized in Israel by a chemist in the late 40s. The CIA had tried it as a truth serum. Didn't work very well because once the subjects got some, they couldn't stop them from talking. And when undercover CIA agents start to talk, it's hard for them to keep going. But it wasn't just about that. It was that they had revelations from that experience that caused many of them to question the CIA, the government, the world. And it turned out to be a pretty destructive drug for the CIA itself. So in the 50s, when pharmaceutical mental health treatments were really gaining traction, beyond lithium and frontal lobotomies and all the stuff that up to that point had been cutting-edge mental health treatment, there was great curiosity in what the pharmaceutical world had to offer to mental health. So LSD was just one of the many substances that were being experimented on by these professors at Harvard. But it was not yet illegal. That happened as a result of the experiences, not before. So it was just an experimental drug. And Harvard was really nervous about it because this drug had the stories of just making people crazy. But in the idea of crazy in the whole world of psychiatry and who's crazy and who's not, all the famous guys wrote about that. And Ram Dass said one of his earliest hospital encounters, an intake in the psychiatric ward, was a man who said he was God. And Ram Dass said, and I'm Ram Dass. And he thinks I'm crazy, and I think he's crazy. And so this idea of what happens from mind-altering substances was the crux of the experiment. But it didn't take them long to figure out that never in the history of pharmaceuticals of any sort had a person changed as a result of just one dose. That's not a very good business model in the pharmaceutical world. So there were a lot of people that said, well, let's not study that because it might upset the apple cart. This story is written very interestingly by an author named Michael Pollan in a book called How to Change Your Mind. So he lists the whole history of this experiment at Boston at Harvard. And the rule from Harvard was you have to only test it on graduate students. You can't test it on undergraduate students. You can't invite anybody in from the public. Just stick with your own guys and see what happens. So one of the most famous experiments was called the Good Friday experiment. Boston University Theology School, just across the river from Harvard, is one of the most liberal theology schools in the country. So it was fertile territory. My father went to school at that place 10 years earlier with Martin Luther King. So here on Good Friday, they assembled 20 divinity students in Morris Chapel, and they gave them the usual double-blind placebo and magic mushrooms to see what would happen. Because the question was, is there a link between religious experiences and hallucinogens? That was the experiment. And of course, placebo doesn't work with magic mushrooms because either you're on it or you're not. There are no hidden effects. And there were students that reported all sorts of mind-altering things which resembled what they had studied about the visions of the saints. So that's the question. This place you go on a drug trip, is it a real place? And when your consciousness gets raised, does it ever go all the way back to where it was before? So if you think about it, not as an altered state that's artificially induced, think of it as a true state that we discover when we go there on different paths. And the use of mind-altering substances has been standard in most of the indigenous cultures around the world as a place to getting to yourself, getting to truth, getting to wholeness by giving up all of what our society and our mom and our pastor taught us about what's really real. That was the experiment. And Timothy Leary and Ram Dass were the first Harvard professors to get kicked out in more than 100 years. And the reason was Timothy Leary was traveling around too much to neglect his students, but Richard Alpert was kicked out because he included an undergraduate in that experiment, which was against the rule he had agreed to. So when the lawyers deposed that undergraduate for the purpose of getting the troublemaker Richard Alpert out of Harvard, he said, yeah, I did it, and it was the most educational thing I ever got at Harvard in the 4 years that I spent there. Meanwhile, Timothy Leary said this drug is too good to just keep in the laboratory, too good to keep experimenting on just graduate students. The world needs to be woken up, and this is the trick. And the other professors, not just the Harvard ones, but all the rest said, no, this is too dangerous. This is letting the genie out of the bottle before we really understand what it's about. And if you remember Pandora's box, that's what it was. And Timothy Leary thought that was great, because he was the thrill seeker, he was a publicity seeker, and he was just the guy to change America into something that was more conscious, more progressive, more real. And he, sure enough, he did get into trouble. So the prelude, the preface to this book just says a little bit about that. About his book, Be Here Now, was first published in 1971. It recorded the two major experiences I had during the 60s. One of them was psilocybin mushrooms, and the other was my guru. Both of them did many things for me, one of which was to give me a familiarity with other planes of consciousness. They showed me that there's much more in any given moment than we usually perceive, and that we ourselves are much more than we usually perceive. When you know that, part of you can stand outside the drama of your life. Let's go to the next slide, please. Maharaji said to Ram Dass, here's your name. We're going to call you servant of God. Ram means God. Das means servant of. That's your new identity. That's your calling. Get back to America and tell the story. And the story is simple. Love everyone, feed everyone, serve everyone. That's it. You'll be great. And that's what happened. And on the way to the airport, he ran into another holy man that said to him, good luck with your book. And Ram Dass didn't know what that was about because he wasn't thinking of a book. He was thinking of sort of a speaking tour because he was a professor. And so he got home and wrote sort of a professor book about visits to the East. And he thought it was great. The publishers hated it. They said, we got too many books about visits to the East. Keep trying. And so he went on a driving tour around America to do what his teacher said. Love people, help people, feed people. Next slide, please. He taught meditation as a way to get into the reality of the universe, to get to the discovery of your true self. And transcendental meditation was not new by this time. And in fact, that ties us into the Beatles. And I appreciate having the Beatles on the program today. The Beatles went to India in 1967 at the same time Richard Alpert was in India. They were there for a little bit different purpose. The main London Swami who was teaching transcendental meditation thought that the Beatles would be a great set of ambassadors for his endeavor. So he paid for them to go to vacation in India and see what it was all about. And the Beatles needed a vacation. They'd been working real hard. And so they went to India. They fixed up the ashram with toilets and air conditioning so the Beatles would have a really nice place to stay in India. And we know more about the Beatles' trip to India in 1967 than we know about Ram Dass because they took along a reporter for Rolling Stone magazine. And the Beatles were famous, and Ram Dass was not. So that's why a lot of the things we started to know in the 70s about meditation, about yoga, about karma, about all these things from the Hindu tradition got started from a Rolling Stone interview with the Beatles on the tour. And we take it for granted now. But in the 70s, it was still rich and mysterious. And the song Let It Be was written in 1970 at the same time Ram Dass was getting his book together. So their version of what they saw in India fits really well together with Ram Dass's version of what he learned in India. So the word transcendental was not new in the 60s, of course. And if we go all the way back in New England to the 1830s and 1840s, the transcendentalists may have invented one of the few philosophies in the world that actually got their first popularity in New England. But it wasn't a new word. And the transcendent is a word that means we've gone beyond science, we've gone beyond belief into something deeper and more universal than either science or belief can explain. And that's why scientists are so skeptical of the claims of the believers, and that's why the believers are so irritated with the certainty of the scientists, is because neither side may have gotten to the root of the issue. And transcendence is that word. That beyond those two ways of knowing, there's a deeper internal way of knowing. That's what the transcendentalists in New England were doing. And you wouldn't be surprised to know that the Unitarians were on duty with those early theorizers about this inner self. Because likewise, the Unitarians were skeptical about the certainty of science, but they wanted to have a faith that was based on experience, not just on belief. So what kind of experience is it? Is it you went to school for a long time, or you had a fancy job, or you traveled a lot? I mean, that's one kind of experience. But it's the deeper experience of the real, of the inner, of the spirit, of the soul, like all these songs we've been singing about today about the soul. And that inner experience was not unfamiliar to me because I was a childhood Methodist. And in the Methodist belief, there are three sources of truth. There's the good book, there's the pastor, and there's yourself. And so the training is to learn how to interpret all of the information that comes to you through any one of those sources. And that the inner knowing, the inner feeling is vital to being a whole Methodist person. That was my training. And so this idea that in my study of Ram Dass I could get to that central meaning of myself was not unfamiliar at all. Ram Dass' book was not a book on purpose. He toured all around the country. In the next slide, please, we see him in a college campus in New England doing what he did, telling stories. And eventually, the people that traveled with him with their cassette recorders recording his talks said, well, this is too good stuff to just deliver live. Why don't we make a book out of it? So they started to transcribe what Richard Alpert said to make a book that they could publish. And the next slide is just one of the pages from what was the original book. This brown part in the center that looks like garbage bag, paper, grocery bag paper. And because it was originally sponsored by the Dalai Lama Foundation, books in Tibet are not bound like this. They're just a pile of paper, and the holy books in the church are wrapped in a saffron scarf and put on the shelf. So it's more like a deck of cards. So this book was like a deck of cards. And I want to read the fine print here, because this is just, all these pages were from what Ram Dass had to say. Here we are, here and now, that's all there is. And if it isn't beautiful, man, there's nothing. So you say, well, I can't have it beautiful now, maybe later. When we get the food home, it will be beautiful. Later never exists. What's happened to life insurance, to tenure, to planning, savings, responsibilities? Nothing's happened to any of it. And so people said, well, all that stuff is great, but you have to explain it to us. So then there was added another 50 pages in the back for how to do it. And that's yoga and meditation and the stories of the great masters and the quotes from Jesus and everything all rolled into one of how the practice of this story comes true for Americans. And then somebody said, well, how did you learn all this stuff? So the first part of the book is the story of Richard Alpert. And I encourage anybody to take a look at this book because it's a fascinating history of a fascinating man. And it's useful, I think, to us Rotarians who are trying to be good to each other, to make a better world, and to really understand what our path is. I came to Ram Dass in a pretty simple way. As a young man, I was accused of looking like people all the time. So first it was John Malkovich. They said, oh, you look like John Malkovich. Well, I enjoyed his movies, so that was good. And then I was told I looked like James Taylor. And in my 40s, I was getting old and bald, just like he was. And so I was flattered by that because I liked his music. And then somebody said, you look like Ram Dass. And I said, well, who's that? That's how it happened. And I've been aided in my understanding of this story by my wife, Jane. She lived in San Francisco in the commune with the guru for a long time in San Francisco before we ever met. And she's been really patient with me in getting over my personal ego self on sort of a slow and gradual path towards understanding and vision. And I'm grateful for all of what you've given to me to push me also down that path. On the website of the church, you won't find a transcript of this talk because I'm just telling a story. But what you'll see there is a reading list if you want to know more about Ram Dass from his words, not mine. That's the place to go. There are a lot of different ways there. So I would just like to leave you with a final reminder of what Ram Dass said. Help people, feed people, love people. That's the path. Thank you.
Embedded in that offertory that I had the choir do, which was a kind of a challenge to, I gave them several short phrases and we put them together, supposedly spontaneously this morning at the offertory, but we're good Western people, Western world people, we ended up having to have a structure. But embedded in that was a chant that was used many, many times at the Ram Dass gatherings. I had a friend who was very, very much part of that group, and I too need to find my copy of Be Here Now. Thanks for all the reminders, John. It was wonderful to hear what you had to say. We're going to sing this simple chant, and it's called Listen, Listen, Listen. So if you'll give me a little Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. At Ram Dass's gatherings, there was a lot of singing, and this was one of the favorites there. And there are many meanings that you can take out of this. Personally, it helped redirect me into myself and to listen here, which I think is a wonderful thing to be able to do. The other one we sang was Love, 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 which is very much part of John's and Ram Dass's message. All these things go back to that place. Let's do our benediction and sing Shalom.
I'm just going to say something profound and simple from Ram Dass. We are all just walking each other home. Salam alaikum, shalom, let it be.
Yeah, that'd be great.